Imagine checking your bank account tomorrow and seeing a $1,000 bill you never planned for. Your car needs a repair, your water heater quits, your medical bill arrives. You can technically pay it, but here's the problem. After that $1,000 leaves your account, what happens to everything else? Because the real danger of a $1,000 emergency isn't always the $1,000 itself. It's what that $1,000 does to the next 30, 60, or 90 days of your life. And that's where a manageable expense can turn into a much bigger financial problem. Today, we're going to follow what happens when a $1,000 surprise hits a normal household and why the first bill may not be the part that hurts the most. $1,000 sounds like a manageable number. It's not a life-altering sum. Most people could, in some way, come up with it. Savings, a credit card, maybe a loan from a family member. So on paper, $1,000 doesn't look dangerous. But here's the twist. What makes $1,000 dangerous isn't necessarily the amount. It's the timing. An unexpected expense doesn't wait for a convenient moment. It doesn't check your calendar or your paycheck schedule. It shows up in the middle of a month that already had a plan. Rent due, groceries budgeted, a car payment already accounted for. The $1,000 doesn't just cost $1,000. It attacks money that already had a job to do. These expenses aren't exotic disasters. They're ordinary things that happen to ordinary households. A car that needs a new transmission or a set of tires. A water heater or furnace that fails without warning. A visit to urgent care that turns into a bill you didn't budget for. Sometimes it's smaller. A phone or laptop that needs replacing because it's tied to your income. Sometimes it's a tax bill or a legal fee that arrives at the worst possible time. None of these are rare. They're common enough that most households will face something like this eventually. The question was never if, it's when, and what happens.
Next, here's something worth sitting with. A household can have income. A household can even have savings and still be financially fragile. How is that possible? Because most savings aren't just sitting there unclaimed. They're already doing quiet work in the background, covering rent, insurance, car payments, groceries, childcare, taxes. On paper, it looks like a cushion. In practice, a lot of it is already spoken for. So when a $1,000 expense hits, it isn't just pulling from a pile of extra money. It's pulling from the buffer that was protecting everything else. The expense doesn't just cost $1,000. It removes flexibility. But that's not where the problem starts. Follow what happens next. Let's make this concrete with an illustration. This is a fictional household. Not a national average, not a typical case. Just one example to make the mechanics visible. Say this household brings home $5,000 a month. Normal expenses, rent, food, insurance, transportation, the usual, run about $4,400. That leaves roughly $600 a month of breathing room. Then the $1,000 expense arrives. The household can pay it. They're not in crisis. But that $600 of monthly breathing room is now gone, and part of their savings went with it too. The emergency fund that used to offer a real cushion is now thinner. Nothing catastrophic has happened yet, but the household's protection against the next surprise has quietly shrunk. When cash runs thin, there are usually a few options. A credit card, a personal loan, borrowing from family, selling something of value, delaying another payment, cutting spending elsewhere. None of these options are inherently bad. Credit cards in particular get an unfair reputation. Using a credit card to cover an expense and paying it off by the next statement is a normal, often smart use of credit. The real risk shows up in a different scenario, carrying a balance and paying interest on it month after month. That's when a
expense can quietly turn into $1,100, then $1,200, simply through the cost of carrying the debt. The original problem doesn't go away, it grows. This is where the real story is. Picture the same household. They handle the $1,000 car repair. It's tight, but manageable. Their buffer is smaller now, but they're fine. Then, a few weeks later, a $400 appliance repair shows up. On its own, $400 wouldn't have been a problem, but this time, the cushion that would have absorbed it is already gone. What used to be a minor inconvenience now forces a harder decision. Dip further into savings, put it on a card, or delay a bill somewhere else. This is what's sometimes called sequence risk, not an official statistic, just a simple way to describe how the order and timing of expenses matters as much as their size. The first expense didn't cause a crisis, but it changed how much room was left for the second one. But imagine the same thing happens again 30 days later.
That's when a manageable household starts to feel real pressure. So what does it actually mean to be prepared for something like this? It's not just save $1,000 and move on. Preparedness works more like layers. A small buffer for immediate minor surprises. A larger emergency fund behind that for bigger expenses. Insurance suited to your actual situation, health, auto, home, so a disaster doesn't become a financial spiral. Recurring expenses that are actually manageable relative to income, not stretched to the edge. Access to credit that you could use in a pinch without relying on carrying a balance as your default plan. And further out, longer-term reserves for the kind of expense that goes beyond a single emergency fund. There's no single universal number here. What's prepared for one household looks different for another, depending on income, expenses, and how much unpredictability they're already carrying. Here's a simple exercise worth trying tonight. Ask yourself, if
$1,000 expense showed up tomorrow, where would the money actually come from? Your checking account? Your emergency savings? A credit card you'd pay off quickly, or one you'd have to carry? Family? Something you'd have to sell? A loan? The honest answer to that question tells you more about your financial resilience than your income alone ever could. Two people earning the same salary can have completely different answers and completely different levels of exposure to the next surprise. A $1,000 bill isn't necessarily a financial disaster, but if paying it destroys the cushion protecting you from the next problem, that's when the real danger begins. Ask yourself one question tonight. If a $1,000 expense appeared tomorrow, would it be an inconvenience, or would it change the entire month? That's the number.